Elon Musk has never been one to play by the rules. From revolutionizing space travel to taking over social media, he's always had a habit of shaking up entire industries. But now, he's setting his sights on something even more dangerous: the cartels. His latest announcement has left people speechless, sparking debates across the globe. Is he serious? Is this just another wild Musk moment, or is he actually about to change the game once again? Let's break it down. Elon Musk drops a bombshell. On February 1st, 2025, Elon Musk, the man who changed the course of the electric vehicle industry, revolutionized space travel, and turned social media upside down with his purchase of Twitter, made a shocking announcement. It was the kind of statement that could have far-reaching implications for the future of US-Mexico relations, law enforcement strategies, and even military involvement in Latin America. Musk tweeted, "Ultimately, I doubt the cartels can be defeated without US special operations." A short, straightforward sentence, but it immediately sparked a heated debate, touching on issues ranging from the growing power of drug cartels to U.S. military intervention. The tweet went viral, and before long it was being dissected across news channels, social media, and in political discussions everywhere. But why did Musk choose to bring up such a volatile topic? It all ties back to his recent role in shaping conversations on social media and his growing influence in U.S. government affairs. To understand the full impact of Musk's bombshell statement, we need to take a deeper look at the context behind his words and what happened in the days that followed. Ever since Musk acquired Twitter in October 2022, the platform had become a focal point for various discussions, from free speech to tech regulation. However, one issue that caught the attention of law enforcement agencies and governments alike was how criminal organizations, including the powerful Mexican drug cartels, were using the platform. Reports had emerged that cartel members were using Twitter, now X, to recruit new members, issue public threats, and glorify their violent and dangerous lifestyles. Despite Twitter's policies against violent content and organizations, enforcement of those rules had been inconsistent. As a result, cartel-linked content continued to thrive on the platform, making it an increasingly popular space for criminal enterprises to operate in. While Musk had made various moves to reform Twitter since acquiring it, this issue remained a thorny one. His tweet on February 1st was not just about cartel violence. It was also a nod to the platform's problematic role in facilitating illicit activities. His tweet suggested that without the involvement of U.S. Special Operations Forces, defeating the cartels would be nearly impossible. By linking the digital battle with the real-world fight against cartels, Musk was amplifying a conversation about the very nature of crime in the digital age. The day after Musk's tweet, he shared something even more startling. On February 2nd, 2025, Musk posted a leaked Border Patrol memo that revealed a chilling escalation. Cartel leaders had authorized the use of weaponized drones to target U.S. agents. The memo confirmed what many had feared for years. Cartels had access to military-grade technology, and they were using it against U.S. law enforcement. The response was immediate. Musk's tweet seemed to suggest that the fight against cartels was no longer just a law enforcement issue, but a national security concern. Cartels were no longer limited to traditional smuggling routes or drug labs. They now had the ability to launch high-tech attacks on U.S. agents. This shift in the balance of power prompted many to question whether the U.S. government would need to get involved in a more direct way, potentially through military intervention. By sharing the memo, Musk was inserting himself into a conversation that could change the course of U.S. foreign policy. The idea of U.S. military operations being deployed against the cartels was not a new one, but Musk's tweet brought it to the forefront of political discourse. Could the U.S. military really take on cartels operating across the border? Was such an intervention justified, or would it be an overreach? It didn't take long for the Mexican government to respond. On February 13th, 2025, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum made a statement that aimed to firmly reject Musk's comments. "We categorically reject U.S. statements that Mexico has ties to drug cartels," Sheinbaum said, emphasizing that her country would not tolerate any foreign interference in its internal matters. The statement was a sharp rebuke, not only to Musk's tweet, but to the broader idea of U.S. intervention in Mexico's fight against organized crime. Mexico's sovereignty had always been a delicate subject, and Sheinbaum's response reflected the growing frustration many in Mexico felt about U.S. involvement in their country's issues. For many Mexicans, the idea that their government was somehow complicit in cartel operations was deeply offensive. This was a delicate diplomatic situation. The U.S. and Mexico have a long history of cooperation on security issues, but the idea of U.S. forces crossing the border to engage in military action against cartels was something else entirely. Musk's tweet had triggered a very real fear that such an intervention might become more than just a hypothetical discussion. As if things weren't already heated enough, on February 17th, 2025, Musk retweeted a claim by journalist Nick Sorter. The tweet suggested that the Mexican Senate had approved the entry of U.S. Special Forces to fight the cartels. This claim took took the controversy to a new level. If true, it meant the Mexican government was officially sanctioning U.S. military involvement in their country. The tweet quickly gained traction, with many people sharing it and discussing the possibility of a U.S. military operation in Mexico. For a brief moment, it seemed like Musk's tweet might signal a shift in U.S.-Mexico relations, a shift that could change the dynamics of the ongoing battle with the cartels. However, the excitement was short-lived. Later that day, journalist Iowan Grillo debunked the claim, clarifying that the Mexican Senate had not approved such an intervention. Sordor quickly deleted the tweet, but the damage had already been done. Musk's retweet had spread the idea of U.S. intervention far and wide, even though it was based on misinformation. This incident highlighted the influence Musk had over public discourse. With just a few words and a retweet, he could shape the narrative on a global scale, even if the information was later proven false. His role in spreading unverified claims raised serious questions about the responsibility of influential individuals on social media platforms. But Musk's involvement in the situation didn't stop there. In November 2024, President Donald Trump appointed Musk to lead the newly established Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. The creation of DOGE was part of a larger effort to streamline government operations, but Musk's role in the department raised serious concerns. Critics argued that his growing influence within the U.S. government, coupled with his vast business empire, could lead to conflicts of interest. Musk's appointment as head of DOGE made him a central figure in government reform. The department's goal was to cut inefficiencies and reduce the size of various federal agencies, including controversial ones like the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Musk had already made it clear that he intended to significantly diminish or even dismantle certain agencies, including the Education Department. This was a bold move, but it also sparked fears that Musk might be consolidating too much power in his hands. His new role meant that Musk now had direct influence over federal policy decisions. He was in a position to shape government operations in a way that no other private citizen had before. Given Musk's ties to private companies like SpaceX and Tesla, critics worried that his influence could benefit his businesses, potentially at the expense of the American people. As Musk's influence continued to grow, questions about ethics and legality began to surface. As a special government employee, Musk was expected to serve in an advisory role, but his actions seemed to go far beyond that. His direct involvement in shaping policy and making decisions about government operations had raised red flags. Critics questioned whether Musk was violating ethical guidelines, especially since his private ventures, like SpaceX, had lucrative government contracts. On February 18, 2025, a U.S. judge ruled that DOGE would not be immediately blocked from directing firings of federal workers or accessing sensitive databases. This decision further fueled concerns about Musk's expanding power. Critics argued that Musk was operating outside the traditional bounds of government oversight and that his influence could set a dangerous precedent. In the span of just a few weeks, Elon Musk's actions and statements had stirred the pot in ways few could have predicted. From his controversial tweets about cartel violence to his involvement in government reform, Musk had positioned himself as one of the most influential figures in the ongoing debate over U.S.-Mexico relations and military intervention. Whether his involvement will lead to tangible changes remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: Musk is not someone who stays quiet in the face of controversy. If you've been following the U.S.-Mexico cartel issue recently, you'd know there's still a missing piece in the puzzle. While debates over cartel violence and U.S. intervention continue to dominate political discourse, it was Trump's bold declaration in January that set everything in motion. Trump declares war against the cartels.
Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
On January 20th, 2025, in a speech that sent shockwaves through political circles across the globe, President Donald Trump delivered one of the most dramatic declarations of his presidency. During his inauguration speech, he publicly labeled Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. This was more than just a political statement. It was a clear indication that Trump was prepared to take an aggressive stance on an issue that had long plagued both the U.S. and Mexico: the powerful and destructive influence of the drug cartels. For years, Mexican drug cartels had been wreaking havoc, not only on Mexican soil, but also spilling into the U.S., contributing to the opioid crisis and violence in U.S. cities. With his FTO designation, Trump sought to elevate the fight against these cartels to a matter of national security. His statement read, "These cartels have conducted a campaign campaign of violence and terror throughout the Western Hemisphere, with destabilizing effects, including a flood of deadly drugs, violent criminals, and vicious gangs into the United States. Donald Trump's declaration presented a clear vision of the stakes involved. He made it clear that the U.S. would no longer treat these cartels as mere criminal enterprises. They were now considered a direct threat to the security and safety of the United States. The implications of this declaration were monumental. By designating the cartels as terrorist organizations, Trump's administration now had a legal and strategic framework to take more direct actions against the cartels. It allowed the U.S. to target cartel assets, freeze bank accounts, impose harsher sanctions, and even use military force if deemed necessary. This was a powerful statement that not only placed the cartels under intense scrutiny, but also set the stage for a potential shift in U.S. military strategy toward Mexico. But why did Trump make this bold move now? The answer lies in the escalating violence and the growing crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Fentanyl, primarily produced by cartels in Mexico, was flooding the U.S. at alarming rates. The opioid crisis had become a devastating epidemic, with thousands of Americans dying from fentanyl overdoses. The cartels were not just traffickers, they were responsible for a national crisis, one that Trump vowed to eradicate. His announcement was meant to show that he was serious about tackling the root causes of this crisis, no matter the cost. The day after his inauguration speech, on January 21st, Trump escalated his pressure on Mexico and Canada, announcing a sweeping new threat, a 25% tariff on all imports from both countries. Trump asserted that fentanyl is killing thousands of Americans and that cartels are bringing it across the southern border, directly linking the tariff to his strategy for combating the drug epidemic. The tariffs would be imposed unless both Mexico and Canada took concrete action to curb the flow of fentanyl and crack down on the cartel's operations. Trump's tariffs were not just about economic leverage. They were a direct challenge to Mexico's government, forcing President Claudia Sheinbaum and other Mexican officials to choose between complying with U.S. demands or risking serious economic damage. Mexico and Canada had long been allies of the U.S., but now Trump was using a weapon, economic sanctions, that could have far-reaching consequences for their economies. By January 24, 2025, both Mexico and Canada were already taking action, albeit cautiously. Mexico deployed additional troops to their southern border with Guatemala to try and prevent the cartels from smuggling drugs into the U.S. Meanwhile, Canada reinforced its border security with the U.S. to prevent any illicit trafficking or cartel-related activities. However, even with these efforts, the issue remained a complex one. The cartels had deeply infiltrated both sides of the border, and military and law enforcement measures alone were unlikely to solve the problem. The stakes couldn't have been higher. While President Sheinbaum's government was under pressure to cooperate with the U.S., Mexico also faced its own set of challenges. The country was caught in a delicate balancing act, cooperating with the U.S. on border security while also protecting its sovereignty. Tensions were brewing, and the cartels, with their vast networks and resources, were not an enemy to be easily defeated. Amid these developments, reports surfaced on February 2, 2025, revealing that the CIA had begun covert drone surveillance missions over Mexican territory. These drones were tasked with tracking cartel activities and smuggling routes. This information was crucial for U.S. officials to understand the scope of cartel operations, but it also raised alarms. Some in the U.S. government were already speculating that the surveillance could be a precursor to military action. The idea of American drones hovering over Mexican airspace, monitoring cartel movements, was unsettling to many. What was the next step? Would the U.S. launch airstrikes against cartel targets? In Mexico, President Sheinbaum was quick to respond to the growing unease. On February 3rd, she called Trump for a 45-minute discussion, seeking to de-escalate the situation. Sheinbaum's goal was clear. She needed to buy more time and prevent further damage to Mexico's economy. During the conversation, Sheinbaum managed to secure a one-month delay on the tariffs, giving both sides some breathing room. This was a temporary victory for Mexico, but it also highlighted the fragile nature of their relationship with the U.S. moving forward. Sheinbaum pledged to deploy 10,000 National Guard troops to patrol Mexico's southern border, an effort aimed at stopping the cartel's illegal activities. In exchange for these commitments, Trump promised to curb the flow of weapons from the U.S. into Mexico. It was a reminder that the cartels didn't just smuggle drugs, they were heavily armed, and many of the weapons used in cartel violence were sourced from the U.S. This was a complex trade-off, with both sides recognizing that cooperation was necessary, even if it came with some uncomfortable compromises. However, not everyone was convinced that the situation was under control. On February 8th, President Sheinbaum dismissed the reports of U.S. drones operating within Mexican airspace as nothing more than a little campaign. She emphasized the need for cooperation between the two nations, urging that military intervention was not the solution. Yet her comments were overshadowed by the escalating tensions between the U.S. and Mexico. In Washington, Washington, the debate about how to handle the cartels was intensifying. On February 13, 2025, President Trump took a significant step by freezing all U.S. foreign aid to Mexico. This move specifically targeted funding for anti-narcotics operations that had been aimed at dismantling fentanyl production and smuggling operations. The freeze was a direct response to what Trump viewed as Mexico's insufficient action against the cartels. This freeze on foreign aid hit Mexico hard. It was a financial blow to the country's efforts to combat drug cartels, and it made it clear that the U.S. was ready to take more drastic measures if necessary. The U.S. had already taken a strong stance, but this move was a further escalation of the pressure. By February 17, 2025, Trump signed an executive order officially designating Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This was a monumental step in the U.S.'s approach to the cartels. The designation opened the door to more aggressive actions against the cartels, including the possibility of direct military strikes. The move was a game changer, one that could drastically alter the dynamics between the U.S. and Mexico. But the declaration also raised a host of questions. Would the U.S. actually use military force in Mexico? How would Mexico respond to such an action? What would the international community think of this escalation? There was no easy answer, and the situation remained in flux. By February 18, 2025, the CIA's drone surveillance missions had expanded, providing more comprehensive intelligence on cartel movements. As these operations continued, there was growing speculation within U.S. government circles about the potential for direct military intervention. If the intelligence gathered through these drone missions identified cartel strongholds or key infrastructure, could the U.S. take action? With Trump's executive order in place and the growing pressure on Mexico, it was clear that the U.S. was preparing to take a much more aggressive role in combating the cartels. Whether through economic sanctions, covert intelligence operations, or military action, the fight against the cartels had entered a new phase, one that was likely to redefine U.S.-Mexico relations for years to come. With the U.S. intensifying its fight against the cartels, tensions in Mexico continue to rise, raising concerns that the violence is about to spiral out of control. Escalating tensions in Mexico. The situation in Mexico has become a tough and dangerous one, especially with the escalating actions by the U.S. government against drug cartels. Under the leadership of President Donald Trump, the United States has adopted an increasingly aggressive stance toward tackling cartel violence, particularly focusing on the rising issue of fentanyl trafficking. However, this change in U.S. policy has not only failed to deter these drug cartels, but has also seemingly sparked an even fiercer response, as you'll soon see. Reports from ABC News have pointed out that Mexico's most powerful cartels, including the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, remain largely unconcerned by Trump's actions. In fact, these criminal organizations are now preparing to take even bolder steps in their operations. They view the escalating rhetoric and military threats from the U.S. as just another part of the ongoing war on drugs, a war they've been battling for decades. Instead of retreating, these cartels are doubling down, using the pressure to further entrench themselves in both Mexico's economy and its political structures. Trump's declaration that Mexican drug cartels were now designated as foreign terrorist organizations, and the immediate announcement of a national emergency at the border has only served to make these cartels more resilient. They're taking advantage of the chaos, shifting their operations, and even expanding to new territories. The cartels, accustomed to threats and government crackdowns, have only grown more sophisticated. With access to increasingly advanced weapons and technology, including drones and military-grade rifles, they're prepared for what may come. The drug trade is a multi-billion-dollar business, and the cartels are no strangers to dealing with U.S. policy changes. They've built intricate networks over the years and have developed methods to move drugs across borders despite various enforcement tactics. The U.S. may be intensifying its military action, but the cartels are adapting quickly, finding new ways to evade detection, while continuing to rake in profits from drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamines. The heavy toll of cartel violence in Mexico has been mounting for years. Since 2006, when then-President Felipe Calderón launched a military-led assault on the cartels, Mexico has been gripped by an ongoing wave of violence. More than 431,000 people have been killed, many of them victims of cartel-related violence. This statistic underscores the ferocity of the conflict and depicts the failure of traditional strategies to combat the cartels. Meanwhile, the violence is multifaceted. There are targeted killings, where cartel members eliminate rivals or traitors, and more indiscriminate mass murders. Entire villages and communities have become battlegrounds. Kidnappings and and extortion are rampant, often with little hope of finding justice. In many areas, cartels have become the de facto rulers, with law enforcement agencies either corrupted by bribes or too under-resourced to intervene. This drug-fueled violence has affected every part of the country. Areas once considered safe have become no-go zones due to cartel activity. And it's not just rival cartels that pose a threat. Many innocent people get caught in the crossfire. Civilians, including children, have been killed in botched cartel attacks, while others have been forced to leave their homes as criminal organizations vie for power. 2019 marked a dark record for Mexico, with 34,600 murders that year, making it the deadliest on record. A large portion of these deaths was attributed to cartel violence. Even with the military crackdown on cartels, violence only worsened. The situation was particularly severe in regions like Jalisco, Guerrero, and Chihuahua, where cartel factions often engage in brutal turf wars, battling over control of lucrative drug trafficking routes. Despite the ongoing crackdown, the government's attempts to curb cartel violence have had limited success. The military, often sent to confront cartel forces, has frequently been outgunned and overwhelmed. In some cases, soldiers find themselves unable to assert control over entire areas, which makes it seem as though the cartels are the real power brokers in these regions. The authorities' reliance on the military to fight these criminal groups has raised concerns. Military action has often been seen as a temporary solution rather than a long-term fix. When the military leaves a region, the violence often resumes, indicating the deep-rooted nature of cartel influence in Mexican society. By 2021, the violence was not only increasing but also becoming more organized and brutal. Rival cartel factions fought for dominance in non-state conflicts, with over 18,000 people dying in these cartel battles. These figures explain the transformation of Mexico into one of the deadliest places in the world, with cartels behaving like private armies. Cartel-on-cartel violence dominated the scene, as factions waged bloody wars for control of lucrative drug routes. In places like Sinaloa and Tamaulipas, it was not uncommon for residents to witness violent confrontations between cartel members and Mexican authorities. Entire neighborhoods would be overrun by cartel gunmen, and law enforcement was often unable to regain control. One of the most worrying trends in 2021 was the rise of more fragmented cartels. As major cartels splintered into smaller factions, the infighting became deadlier. This fragmentation led to even more chaos, with cartels fighting amongst themselves for dominance in the drug trade. On September 19, 2024, the city of Culiacan, in the heart of Sinaloa, was rocked by a violent clash between rival factions of the Sinaloa cartel. The battle, which involved high-powered weapons and heavy artillery, left 39 dead, including 2 soldiers, and resulted in 37 forced disappearances. This was one of the most violent clashes in Mexico's recent history, and it marked a turning point in the escalating conflict. By 2024, the spread of cartel influence across the United States had reached catastrophic levels. Fentanyl and methamphetamines, 2 drugs predominantly trafficked by Mexican cartels, were responsible for nearly 300 overdose deaths per day in the U.S. This figure is a stark reminder of the devastating impact the cartels have on American society. The cartels have flooded U.S. streets with these powerful drugs, which are often cheaper and more potent than heroin, making them a deadly alternative for drug users. The cartel-run supply chains that extend into U.S. cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York have created an epidemic of drug addiction. The consequences of this crisis have rippled across American society, creating a situation where drug overdose deaths are now higher than homicides. The epidemic has led to increasing calls for the U.S. government to adopt even stronger measures against the cartels, including the possibility of military action. A particularly alarming development is the use of child soldiers by some cartels, who are trained in combat from a young age and used as enforcers. This practice is not only a violation of human rights, but also a clear indication of how deeply entrenched cartel power has become in certain regions. By recruiting minors, cartels ensure a constant pipeline of fresh recruits, while also making it harder for law enforcement to retaliate, as many of these children are too young for the military to engage in combat. This underscores the sense of impunity that these cartels operate with, knowing they can effectively control swaths of land with a small but heavily armed and loyal force. The brutality extends to the civilian population as well. Entire villages have been subjected to cartel rule, where residents are forced to either cooperate or face deadly consequences. In these places, people live in constant fear of being caught in the middle of cartel turf wars, often finding themselves in life-or-death situations as the violence escalates. The Mexican cartels have become so powerful that their influence extends well beyond the borders of their home country. Cartels like Sinaloa, CJNG, and Los Zetas have global reach, and they are deeply integrated into international trade networks. These organizations generate billions of dollars every year from drug trafficking, and their economic power has allowed them to corrupt politicians politicians, bribe law enforcement, and manipulate the country's legal systems. In some cases, cartels have so much sway that they can essentially dictate government policies in certain areas, ensuring their operations continue without significant interference. In addition to drug trafficking, cartels have branched out into other criminal enterprises. They tax local businesses, run protection rackets, and control illicit industries like illegal logging and fuel theft. The cartels are involved in virtually every illegal activity imaginable, ensuring that their tentacles stretch into nearly every corner of Mexican society. As a result, it has become increasingly difficult for the Mexican government to wage an effective war against them, especially when the cartels wield more power than many local officials. With the U.S. putting more pressure on Mexico, the Mexican government faces a dilemma. The government has promised to fight the cartels, but at the same time, it must contend with the fact that many parts of the country are effectively controlled by criminal organizations. And in some instances, politicians and law enforcement officials are either complicit in cartel activities or too afraid to intervene. The future remains uncertain, but there is cautious optimism about the possibilities for progress. U.S.-Mexico cooperation continues to strengthen, and both governments are acknowledging that solving the cartel problem requires more than just military force. It requires tackling the social and economic issues that fuel the cartel's power. One of the more promising developments is the growing focus on rebuilding communities affected by cartel violence. Social programs aimed at preventing addiction, providing jobs, and offering educational opportunities are starting to take root in areas that have long been controlled by cartels. These initiatives are designed to give people an alternative to joining criminal organizations, which is crucial in breaking the cycle of violence. While the cartels remain powerful, both governments are working toward long-term solutions that could help dismantle their operations. U.S. efforts to curb demand for illegal drugs, coupled with Mexico's commitment to stronger law enforcement, are key to breaking the cartel's stranglehold on both countries. In the years to come, it will take patience, perseverance, and cooperation to make real progress. The war on drugs is far from over, but there are signs that, with continued effort, both Mexico and the U.S. can make headway in reducing cartel power and improving the safety and well-being of their citizens. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.